All right. So let's kick this off. We are here to celebrate the almost mutual release of Night Tide and Full English. And do you want to tell everyone why we decided to do a joint book launch?
Yes, because we enjoy each other's company greatly. And we didn't think anyone would come. So we thought it was just going to be the two of us chatting like we do every other week, with maybe Anna's parents joining in.
Which, yeah,
So, but no, we worked on these books together in a lot of ways that we were writing through very similar circumstances at times. We inadvertently, got to very similar themes, and pretty much egged each other on, sometimes joyously, sometimes naggingly, through much of these months of writing. And then you got to get the very first look, other than my wife, at modern English, and I got to edit Night Tide. Yay.
So, I mean, and I got to get the very first look because I was very small and pathetic and very sick. And so I said, please, I need something to read. And yeah. Modern English, which was wonderful. No, but I think in any profession, and obviously as writers and creators, I think it's especially important because we do spend so much time in our heads, but it's so important to have friends who are in this with you. Especially because it can get really lonely,
Yeah.
And of course you were my editor on this, so that's helpful.
And it was a particularly lonely year.
Yes.
It's more than a year now, really, for us on this journey. But yeah, you were my go-to person, whether it was a really great day or a really horrible day on this.
Yeah. I have to embarrass myself and ask a Zoom question. Oh my goodness, this is a crisis and a half. I'm not sure. I'm a little concerned that it's only recording you, which actually is fine.
No, it's horrible. That's horrible.
Well, you know what? I don't really see what I can do to fix that. So whatever, it's fine. It'll be great.
Anna, it asked everybody to confirm that we were okay if it was recording.
Yes.
So I think that means that it's recording everybody.
It's definitely recording.
And everything.
Okay. Awesome.
This is so
okay. All right. Well, we're just going to assume everything's fine. And Brooke just confirmed that it was going to do what I wanted it to do, and I trust Brooke with my life. So yeah. So we wrote these books mostly. Well, it'd be. How do we even keep track of time, right? Like 2019, 2020.
Yeah, I keep saying last year, and then I realized that everyone thinks I'm talking about the pandemic, but you and I each had a really awful year, like
right.
The pandemic. So I think that's something I don't assume everyone here has read my social media, but I released my acknowledgements publicly before I released the book to just sort of tell people like what this was a really horrible time that I was writing this book. And thankfully, everyone is assuring me that none of that comes through in the book, that the book is actually a really happy, wonderful escape from that. So that's a miracle. But we both wrote, through some pretty heavy stuff. Yeah. And we both turned in romances.
Yes, which... So I have to first say that, I certainly have had romantic elements in my other work, but it wasn't until, things in my own life just got really rough that I really sort of dove into romance as a genre, which initially surprised me, but the more I thought about it, makes perfect sense. I'm not sure anyone will, a light escape isn't something that is often used to describe me, but
No, and Night Tide isn't like a frivolous, fluffy story, but you're definitely working with the a genre that allows you to dive into something a little bit darker with the safety net of hope all around it, which I think you really did in this book, and I commend you for that.
Safety net of hope. I like that.
Just
I
made
like
it up.
that.
Right
Yeah,
now.
and and that's the title of the third book in the trilogy, The Safety Net of Hope. So you promised that we would discuss some of the themes that went along in our books, and one of them, I think, especially for you, was Gentleman Jack. So I think we should just dive right into queer fandom immediately, and then we can go on from there.
Yeah, let's not make anybody wait to talk about my borderline inappropriate obsession for this show. Because you and I were trying to figure this out after both books had been finished and first drafts had been sent to each other.
Mhm.
We realized we had actually hit on some really similar themes, despite the fact that we didn't talk about these details while we were writing. We talked almost every day, and yet didn't dive into sort of the larger themes of these stories. And yet, in really different settings, in really different books, we both settled on class conflicts a lot. We did a lot around expectations from parents, from society, from respective stations in life. We ended up talking about horseback riding crops and horses.
Horseback riding, yeah.
We both have pivotal scenes involving horses and riding crops, and it was just a weird sort of confluence of how did we talk to each other about this? Did we implant any of this, subconsciously? How did we both end up in such different books covering such similar themes? And I think it was you who finally said it was the year of Gentleman Jack.
Mm-hmm. And just there was something so inspiring, I think, about just like watching Anne Lister walk around the English countryside and walk, or would you call it a stomp? It was
she definitely gay walks.
Yeah, that swagger. No, that it was very inspiring, and so we wanted some of that in our work. You have a James character. We both have somewhat antagonistic James characters. Mine is a cat.
So, yeah, we both have a yes, thank you, James kind of character. Yours is a cat, but that's really on brand for you to make your yes, thank you, James a cat.
Yes, and I love him, and he's going to play a big role in the last book in the series.
Wow. So somehow we ended up letting like larger queer fandom sink into, these stories. And I am not at all ashamed to say that I, was not writing before Gentleman Jack came along. 2019, we called the summer of sick.
Yes.
For both of us.
Yes.
You were concussed and
I don't remember.
I had pneumonia that is presumably Legionnaire's disease, and it was just horrendous. And we both laid on our couches and binge watched this show. And so that was really, for me, the first point that I was like, I used to write things like that. I remember you used to do that. And so
remember what happened.
How you end up with a book with a castle on the cover of it is that you watch too much Gentleman Jack.
Well, I'm really upset that you included swords because I didn't. And I feel like that's so much more on brand for me than it is for you. And yet.
Yeah, I got there first. I didn't get there first. You have swordplay in other books. You just didn't have it in this book.
No.
So you could say that I was piggybacking off of Nottingham.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Which also came out last. Well, it's just not 2020. What are we gonna do?
Yeah.
Yeah. We also both wrought, with wrathful intent.
Occasionally.
We both wrote spin-offs, which I'm in the middle of drowning through edits on the Compass Rose sequel. So I am writing like a real series, by which I mean a consecutive series, as well as the Seal Cove romances, which are more spin-off series, which I have to say are so much easier to work with. I don't have to, I'm not like wedded to the canon of what I wrote in the first book, however many years ago. But I've really enjoyed, there's something so nice about just getting to work with the same characters, but also being able to move away from them. I mean, it's just this nice happy blend of, having your cake and eating it too, or having your English tea and eating it too.
Yeah, this is this is technically my second spin-off sort of series, but I haven't intended to write either of them. I'm really envious of the way that you've got to plan these things, because I didn't plan to write a sequel, which I haven't. It's not a sequel, it's a spin-off. So just to get a little wonky writerly, a sequel would follow the same main characters. The spin-off series that we're talking about, we have crossover characters. So for Anna, they all live in the same house, which is very handy. For me, it's a little more convoluted in that I got calls from readers and reviewers to follow a character that was popular from Full English, and made the deal just sort of kind of halfway. Rach is like, it's me, reviewers is me. Actually, and I just agreed that if more than 50% of the reviews asked for her story, that I would go ahead and try and write it. But about 90% of the reviews called for her story. So that's a pretty overwhelming thing that I have to go back and now figure out.
What I love most, though, is that you called me and were like, well, okay, so I want to write this book, but I wrote this character who's just like really witty and funny and smart, and I don't feel like I'm that. And I, of course, contradicted you, but there is, I mean, I don't think I would have set myself up to intentionally write a character who is more intelligent than I am, because first of all, I would be offended on a molecular level. No, just kidding. But it's hard to write character. I mean, and just to sort of explore those vulnerabilities, right? And you with Lady Vic's character, I mean, I know that you really got in there, and I went into Night Tide, which we didn't actually explain to anyone what these books were about, which
that would have been smart.
So maybe we should do that eventually. But my two protagonists are two veterinarians, definitely enemies to lovers, with an emphasis on the enemies. My favorite trope. But I really thought that I was going to be able to go in and just really dig into Lillian's character, because I'd written her in the first book, and I thought I'd set myself up for a character who I knew really well. And gosh, that didn't go as planned.
Yeah, we got to talk about this a lot during the edits. This was I've told you this, but everyone else, this book was so much fun to edit. So much fun to edit, because she's written characters that are both fundamentally good and tremendously wicked to each other at different times. And it was just great fun to get to play with those dynamics. But when I finished reading the first draft, I remember writing back to you and saying, I like Ivy better. Am I supposed to like Ivy better? I didn't think I was supposed to like Ivy better, because I liked Lillian in the first book of this series. I was really excited to get her story. I thought, well, I'm going to fall in love with Lillian, and this super mean woman is going to come in and wreck everything. And that wasn't how that first draft turned out. It's not how any of the subsequent drafts turned out either. But more so, I felt like Ivy was so clear on the page from the beginning. And I was like, where's Lillian? Did you have a hard time when you were writing that?
I think so. This was the first book in which I intentionally put as much of myself into a character as let me put some caveats in there real quick. Some experiences on the page that I shared with Ivy. And so I really felt like I could channel her experiences with, not just chronic pain, but just like grappling with some of the things that she grapples with. And so I think that allowed me to really tap into her psyche, even though I come from a total just a different economic background from her, a different yeah, I mean, just we're on paper quite different, but I really felt like there was a part of her that I really connected with, which was, I mean, that made it so much easier. I'm going to just write myself into books all the time from now on. Whereas Lillian, I would have thought it really, characters are so surprising. It's somewhat disconcerting, I think, to analyze one's psyche from that perspective. But yeah. I mean, obviously you are descended from ancient gentility, and I've seen you riding around the countryside on your steed.
Yeah.
Frequently. Look, you've got a fireplace in the background. You're practically a lord.
Yeah. As my kid just pressed his face up against the glass doors. This is the genteel life I live. There's a 13-year-old with his nose smashed against my French doors. No, this was so far out of my realm of experience. I actually am descended from ancient nobility. Behind me, there, my grandfather has typed up that lineage for me, so I have it whenever I need it. But he goes back about 15 generations before we hit anyone of note. So I think that we could not have been farther from my personal experience in writing these characters. But that's what's fun, is that you get to find something in these really foreign sorts of life circumstances and then try and make people relate to them. And they're like, you can see on the page, this is not a surprise that, you know, I'm struggling with Vic's class system the way that Vic is struggling with her class system. There are times where another character will say, you know, you can't really defend one family having all that much money. And instead of her trying to, I just had to say, no, no justification for this whatsoever. It's just the system that we have, you know, and not really trying to justify that. But when you're born into it, what do you do with it? And that's really, in a lot of ways, for Ivy, the similar, you know, she's having these awakenings, but so what do you do with that knowledge?
And I wish I had the opportunity to find out, but
yes, if anyone ever wants to give me that kind of money,
I know,
to see what I do with it, I would be willing to participate in that social experiment.
Yes, may that all be a problem for us. So modern English is set in modern England, but you I love the way that you just explore how the nobility has adapted or isn't adapting, as the case I think is. And I happen to know that your wife is deeply invested in English nobility. So you did have that expert on your side. And I'm married to a vet. So for me, you know, these are very similar things, right? You know,
yes.
Susie's involvement with the British upper crust and Tiffany's involvement with veterinary medicine. But I really loved getting to dive as deep into my wife's world as I did, but more to the point, we were together while she was in vet school, so I was owed an opportunity to use this somehow, because let me just say, that was tough. But I fell in love with these characters in a way that I normally don't. I will confess. It's not that I don't love all of my characters, but as anyone who has read my other work knows, I do enjoy doing just like brutal things to them. And I had some qualms about hurting, well, I don't know, maybe I didn't. I felt like I did at periods of times. I thought, oh, they're gonna hurt now, but then I texted you and was cackling like, this is gonna happen now. But I think that we should dive into some readings so that we can take questions. And I think that you should go first.
Okay.
That's my idea.
All right. I will read first. I'm going to give you all a little bit of a setup first. So in this book, we have two main characters. We have Sophia, who is an American movie star, and we have Lady Victoria Penchant, who is the eldest child of the Duke of Northland, England. I had to make a fictional dukedom because I didn't want to get sued, but it's very much set in Northeast England. And they did not hit it off particularly well. I wouldn't say quite enemies to lovers, but definitely suspicion. There's some suspicion between them, and Sophia has to shoot her current movie that she's very invested in inside and around the castle that Vic is in charge of running. So she chafes a bit against Vic's authority over that space and decides that she's going to needle the lady of the house to try and figure out what is underneath this super perfect shell. And Vic holds her off, admirably for about 5 or 6 chapters. But once they finally clash, once they end up in bed together, Sophia realizes that she might have just bitten off more than she can chew. And so we're going to pick them up on that next morning, where we begin to see the dynamic that has existed up until this point begin to flip. So we will pick up the morning after. Sophia is arriving at work. Oh, and the other character in this scene is Talia, who is a producer and a friend of Sophia's. "What the hell happened to you?" Talia asked as Sophia climbed slowly out of the van into what appeared to be some sort of forest preserve. That is a great question, and one Sophia had been trying to answer for herself ever since it was happening. The only conclusion she'd come to was that she had lit the fuse on what she thought to be a firecracker, only to find out too late that it was actually dynamite. Not that she was complaining, not exactly, but the explosion, or rather explosions, as there had been way more than one of them last night, left her more than a little unsteady, and she'd had virtually no time to reflect. Sophia finally found the strength and wherewithal to crawl from the lush 4-poster bed shortly after 5 in the morning. For her ladyship's part, she'd lived up to the chivalry of her nature by offering breakfast, followed by a car to the set. What Sophia really needed, though, was sleep, followed by caffeine, and she'd found both in short supply. From Talia's shocked stare, their absence must have been blatantly obvious. "Do you have coffee?" Talia nodded. "How would you like to take it?" "Preferably in an IV, but I drink it as black as my soul if need be." Talia snorted. Oh, there's my clock. Talia snorted. "Okay, I'll go drum some up for you, but when I get back, I'm going to hear this story. As soon as we have time," Sophia agreed. "Oh, we have time." Talia rolled her eyes. "Tommy's chute is running behind." Sophia pinched the bridge of her nose. "Coffee first, then murder." "Got it." Talia scooted off, and Sophia went to lean against a nearby stone structure. She was probably violating some sort of historical landmark rules and wrinkling her dress at the same time, but she couldn't bring herself to care. At least this outfit wasn't as puffy as some of the others. The square-cut bodice still showed more than would have been historically prudent, but the sleeves were straight and the skirt hung loosely without too many ruffles, which was damn lucky. She wasn't sure she could handle a sex hangover and a hoop skirt simultaneously. That thought sent a vivid flash of memories through her mind's eye, and it must have shown because Talia gave a low whistle as she approached with the steaming cup in her outstretched arm. "You better make this story as dreamy as the expression on your face, because if it's not earth-shattering, I'm going to send out a missing persons report on my most cynical and aloof friend." "Oh, the cynic is very much still here. But yes, I'll admit the story really is that good." "Spill," Talia ordered. "Well, drink, then spill." She lifted the coffee to her lips, fully intending to heed those directions, but before she'd managed 2 full swallows, the sound of hoofbeats pounding the ground caused every head to turn. Her first thought was that someone had lost control of an animal, and her senses surged into high alert. But as a stunning white horse burst into view between the trees ahead, it became instantly clear that not only was its rider still astride it, she was 100% in command. Victoria was upon them in seconds, wheeling her ride to a halt and practically vaulting from its back. She turned first to pat her mount's muzzle, which gave Sophia a chance to get a full look at her riding breeches and knee-high leather boots. Victoria handed the reins to a man who'd apparently been waiting for them. Then she unclasped her black riding helmet and snapped off her leather gloves before handing them to the assistant as well. And as if that little display weren't enough, she ran her hands through her long blonde hair, shaking out the locks and straining her form-fitting white shirt like some literal lesbian wet dream. The move looked like something out of a movie, and it took Sophia a second to realize they were actually supposed to be shooting a movie here. Only Vic wasn't in it, which now seemed like a vast oversight, since Sophia's brain felt like it was on actual fire. It wasn't lost on her that Vic's outfit nearly matched the one Sophia wore during their first encounter. But on her, it wasn't a costume. She was born to wear the attire, and it showed right down to the way she moved with grace and confidence. If the cameras had been on in that moment, Sophia would have been utterly lost, because she could barely remember her own name, much less her lines, as Victoria strode toward them like she owned the damn forest, which, come to think of it, she did. All right. So that is Modern English. And now it's your turn.
Well, let me adjust myself for a moment. I see that you very cleverly just decided to pull your reading up on your screen like a professional. So I'm going to be reading from Night Tide. This is chapter 2, which didn't occur to me to check. I was going to pull a reading that wasn't immediately available on the preview on Amazon, but whatever. So this takes place shortly after Ivy has arrived at the clinic and really thrown Lillian for a loop. So Lillian is going jogging with Amelia, who was one of the protagonists in Spindrift, and she's just like bitching constantly. The feel of her feet pounding the pavement usually helped her burn off steam. Tonight, however, it only seemed to fuel her anger. One full week of working with Ivy had proven that absolutely nothing about the relationship had changed, and the second week was not getting off to a good start. I swear she's out to get me. It is a little weird she ended up here, said Amelia. Just wait till you meet her. It will happen eventually. They turned down a quiet road paralleling the river. Another jogger appeared ahead of them with a little dog. Not food, Amelia told her greyhound. I'm going to need to start taking blood pressure medication. I can't be in the same hospital as her. She's like a dog fart. She permeates. Ahead, the jogger paused to retie a shoe. She didn't pay any attention. All she could think about was the smug smile on Ivy's face when she'd suggested Lillian catch up on the latest issue of Clinician's Brief. Should we cross to the other side of the road? Why? Lillian asked. Amelia pointed at the figure drawing rapidly near. You have to be fucking kidding me. She came to a dead halt, surprising Amelia, as the other jogger looked up from tying her shoe. Ivy's ponytail swayed as she recoiled in surprise. Her running pants clung to her muscular thighs. She must still be riding. And her shirt was the sort of athletic racerback crop top Lillian hated on principle. Growing up in the early 2000s had forever embittered her against clothing that bared her midriff. It didn't help that Ivy pulled it off, just as she pulled off everything else. Said Amelia. Lillian broke eye contact with Ivy and glanced at her friend, who was staring at both of them with a quizzical tilt to her eyebrows. Ivy's dog, meanwhile, had taken advantage of his owner's distraction to size up Amelia's. The greyhound pretended not to see him. It occurred to Lillian after a moment that there had been a very long and very awkward pause, and that as the point of commonality, it was up to her to break it. Amelia, she said, snarling in an approximation of a smile. This is my new coworker, Ivy Holden. As if her name were a charm, Ivy stood in a graceful motion that made Lillian want to hamstring her and called her dog back to her side, where he sat and wagged his stub tail. Nice to meet you. I'm sorry to interrupt your workout. Were you jogging this way? Ivy pointed down the road they were following. No, said Lillian. At the same time, Amelia said, yes. Ivy's smile grew. Mind if I jog with you for a bit? While Lillian gawked at her, Ivy turned to Amelia. Lil and I went to school together. We used to work out at the same time. I always found her dedication inspiring. If by dedication you mean my ability to lift more than you, then yes, I agree. Although, judging by Ivy's shoulders, those days were over. She'd added muscle in the intervening years, whereas Lillian had stopped lifting regularly and focused mostly on running. There's a metaphor I should never examine too closely, she thought. Ivy said, we'll see about that. How far are you going? They'd already done a mile, and usually averaged 3 or 4. 5, Lillian said. Amelia shot her a sideways glance. Nice, I've been doing 6, but I probably should take it easy today. Lillian didn't scream, for which she was very proud of herself. Let's get to it then. She took off at a faster clip than normal. She'd regret it soon, but not as much as she'd regret appearing weak in front of Ivy. Amelia and Ivy caught up shortly. She hoped Ivy would jog on Amelia's other side, but instead she flanked Lillian, for the sake of the dogs. What about my sake, he thought about saying, but settled for staring at the shoulder of the road as it unspooled before her. Can your dog handle a jog this long? Amelia asked. This little guy? She saw Ivy smile at her dog out of the corner of her eye. He can go longer than I can. Something he and I have in common, said Lillian. This time, Ivy's smile was solely for Lillian. The smirk, she refused to grant a grin, status on principle, was as familiar as her favorite sweater. The challenge in Ivy's eyes hardened her resolve, even as her heart rate accelerated. This was how it had always been between them. No truce, no mercy, no ground ceded, only war. Colorado must be beautiful this time of year, said Amelia. Lillian got the impression she was trying to steer them into less volatile territory. She had learned quickly there was no such thing, but she let Amelia draw Ivy into conversation while she waited for her next opportunity to pounce. Ivy had her charm on full force. She laughed when appropriate and asked leading questions to keep Amelia talking. Was she imagining that Ivy seemed to be having a hard time catching her breath? She picked up her pace fractionally. Ivy, mid-question, matched her with a grim set to her lips. Lillian's legs, lungs, and abdominals were on fire by the time Amelia called for a cool down. She tried not to stagger as she broke into a walk. They were all breathing hard. Ivy's face glowed, a reminder she never turned the beet red shade Lillian did, and she laughed in between deep breaths. Damn, Lil, I forgot how fast you are. It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd ever received from Ivy Holden. It goes downhill rapidly from there.
It's so good, though. They're so awful to each other.
They're so awful to each other.
I think you're making me more evil.
Nothing would bring me joy.
I think that I have pulled you into the romance world, and you have pulled me into like a significant higher threshold for like torturing them within that genre.
Yeah, you know how they say that if you're with someone like really negative, you'll only be drawn down. Like you can't raise them up.
Challenge accepted.
No, that was supposed to be a threat.
And you see how scared I am.
Very, very. I'm not a negative person.
This is why we work. This is why we work as an editing team.
Yes.
And as a writing team, because you push me into areas that I'm not comfortable with, and I make you write emotions.
Yeah, I don't love that part so much. I like the part where I push you in different ways, but less where I have to have the characters have feelings, which I have to say, actually, I am enjoying more now because those feelings can be so just like deliciously angsty. And then when they're nice, it's so much more rewarding.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So I could talk about your work just like forever, but I also want to I want to respect people's time. So I think we should open up to some questions.
So Rach has asked a question here. Rach, do you want to pop in and ask that so folks can hear you?
Yeah, definitely. I know, Anna, that you have another book, at least one book to come from the series, but Rach, any more from the full and modern English crew? Is there going to be more books? What we thinking?
Funny you should ask.
Yeah, I had said no. Initially, not because I didn't want to write it, but because I just didn't see a place for it to go. I didn't have characters lined up, like I did the first time. But I got a cover proposal from Anne McMahon for Modern English that was a stunner. I mean, just a gorgeous, most perfect romance cover that she did in sort of the purple hue that Full English had been done in. And I loved this cover immediately, but it didn't fit the book. And so I spent a couple days sort of going back and forth between, can I put out a cover because it's really pretty, even if it doesn't reflect the book, or does it need to have some sort of connection to the book? And I ultimately decided that I couldn't do that, but I wanted to keep the cover. And so I immediately messaged Anna. I think this was over Thanksgiving, because I seem to remember like I was cooking during this.
Based her in one.
I was like, I have to turn down this cover, but I don't want to give up this cover. How about I just tell Anne that we'll use it for the third book in the series? And Anna was like, is there a third book in the series? And I was like, yeah, I'm going to plot it right now. And so I was making meringues, and meringues take forever. And I just stood over my mixing bowl and started texting to Anna, like, her name is Pip, and she's Victoria's cousin, and I don't know, maybe she's genderqueer, but she's angsty. And Anna was like, are you writing this down? Is this a real book? When did this happen? And I was like, it's happening right now, and I'm writing it down in this text to you, so don't lose it. And so the next day I wrote back to Bywater and said, I want you to make me a new cover for this book, but I want to use that one for the third book in the series. Surprise! There's a third book in the series. And Salem and Anne both wrote back immediately and were like, yes, we'll take the third book in the series, please. So as of right now, I am about 17,000 words into that. So still very, very new. But
is Talia the love interest?
No, unfortunately. So for those of you who don't know, Talia makes her debut in this book, In Development, and she's associated with the movie business there. And so I brought her back as another fun crossover. So this is a spin-off of Modern English, but it's also got crossover from In Development. She is not the center of this book, but those of you who have read In Development will also remember that Talia has custody in this book of a young woman who I won't give away her story. Her name is Addie. And I do hope that we're going to see them in a future book. I've also, now we're getting into some deep dives here, but we've got a young character from Full English named Reg, who is a kid in Full English, and she's becoming a teenager, and now she's becoming sort of in her late teens in the book that I'm writing now. And I do think she and Addie's worlds could collide, perhaps in another book down the road.
Little Reg all grown up.
Yeah, so we're gonna work on Reg, and so the third book is tentatively titled Plain English, and we're gonna work on developing Reg as a side character. Let her sort of come into her own awkward late teenage years in this book, in the hopes that she gets to have a full story down the line. So definitely Plain English is in the works, and we may see what happens with Reg in this book could determine what happens, maybe a fourth book in the series.
See, I'm so jealous because I've been trying to figure out how I can link Compass Rose to this series without like major catastrophe.
Yeah, that's gonna be real hard. You haven't given yourself Easter egg potential.
Oh, watch me.
Well, shall I start asking some questions?
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. And then we'll go through.
And then we can, yeah. So let's do that. Anna, did you always know that Spindrift was going to be more? Did you always know that you were going to then go on to make more books, or was it originally a solo book, or had you already decided that it was going to be a series?
I had decided it was going to be a series after I finished the first draft of the first book, and I realized that I had enjoyed writing it because I initially wasn't sure. And that kind of confirmed things for me. And then when I went back to edit, I was able to plan things in a way that made it work.
Awesome. And are you, Anna and Rachel, are you both plotters or pantsters? How do you, like, tell me how you do it? As someone that would one day love to write a book, I'm very interested in this.
Yeah, I don't think neither Anna nor I have a very clear answer to this. Yeah, also I can only speak for me. I usually try and write just like a rough, and sometimes it's really just 2 or 3 paragraphs of what I know is coming. So I don't think any real plotter would consider that plotting. But I do often, sort of sketch out the next scene when I finish for the day. So I at least am not starting completely in the dark, but I do not have anything that would resemble a cohesive outline. I keep character studies. That's about as much plotting as I'm able to do.
Cool. And Anna?
I'm getting better about planning somewhat ahead. I have a vague idea usually of what's going to happen, and with the romances, it's been significantly easier because I don't have to worry so much about major plot twists. So in that respect, that's been quite enjoyable, and I can definitely consider myself more of a plotter with these than I would otherwise. But I will write a first draft, and then after that point I go in and I really outline. And so I would say that after I've written the first draft of Spindrift, I knew approximately what was going to happen with the rest of the books in the series. So
okay. Cool. I found a mute setting. Let me try real quick. Okay, so now Anna, you're unmuted. So now I just need to find Rach. Can you see me?
I've unmuted myself, so I'm here.
Okay, so hopefully that will help going forward.
And if anyone has any other questions other than my questions, if they could put them in the chat box, and I'll either send them to the guys or I'll ask them for you. My next question was to Rach. Rachel, setting a book in another country from where you live can be difficult. How did you go about the research? I know you've visited England and Scotland, I've seen as well, but I know you visited England. Was that where it all came from, or what research did you have to do when you came back?
Yeah, so I lived in England for about 8 months, very much in the village where Full English is set. Our local castle probably had the most influence on, the setting of modern English. So I don't know that I could have done it without having been to those places. So modern English was written stateside for the most part, but I don't know that I could have done it without those, sort of sensory experiences. However, I will say that I just bugged the living crap out of the Facebook person for the castle. When I found out that you could chat with them and they would respond to you immediately. Someone said, oh, the people in those jobs love to get questions like that instead of what time do you open? But I was like, what are the castle walls made of? What kind of oak is that? Is that oak? Is that mahogany? I'm looking at pictures of your library, and I just like kind of ran with that. So
That's brilliant.
Once I had, my own pictures and my own memories, I did lean on them, to say like what are you using the East Garret for at the moment? And they were really good about getting back to me and engaging those questions quickly.
What's probably the most, this is to both of you, what's the most interesting thing that you've had to research that you go, wow, that's not anything I'd ever thought in my life that I'd have to Google or research? What is that?
Can I tell you some of the sentences that I had to cut out of Anna's research?
Yes, most definitely.
do.
Because Anna has entirely too much research with animals and veterinary things. I never thought in my life that I would have to say, your romantic lead just walked into the room. Can you please stop talking about donkey semen? That's a sentence I had to type.
Well, all right, the pun potential was there, and I couldn't turn it down. I don't know what to tell you.
So Anna, I feel like you're gonna have a better answer to this question than I will.
Listen, I'm not going to pull up my search history because no one needs to know this. I Googled very strange things. I spent a lot of time looking up human anatomy, like not the kind maybe that's on your mind right now, but like, what bone is that? I'm for the romances. Let's just narrow this down. I didn't Google anything particularly bizarre, but blood feather. I'll just throw that out there. For those of you who aren't in the veterinary field, that will sound very disturbing. And for those of you who are, you will not be as enthralled. But yes, blood feathers.
So that's something to look up later, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how's this I love and I hate asking this question because it just brings it to the forefront, but I think it's really interesting to readers just now. How is writing during quarantine or isolation during COVID going for both of you? How do you feel? Is it a hindrance or is it helpful to be stuck indoors and at your desk?
Well, I think in some ways I feel lucky in that it hasn't been as big of a change for me as I know it has been for others. So I had worked from home off and on, I guess for the past couple of years. So I certainly miss seeing other people. Brooke, I'm looking at you here. But I mostly, it really hasn't been as big of a change as I would have thought. So from that perspective, it's been okay. From other perspectives, it's been hard, but
Yeah.
For me, actually similar in that it hasn't changed my work. I still sit in my chair and do my writing the same way that I always have. The biggest change in my life has been that now there's other people in the house. My son used to go to school and my wife would go to work, and I would have hours of being the only one in the house. And that is not my life anymore. They are always here. They are always here.
I hear you. I hear you in a big way right now. Like,
yeah.
I've worked from home most of my life, so all of a sudden there's other humans like
and you have
around my house.
You have a little one with a puppy. I don't have a puppy to contend with, but I'm lucky that my guy is 13 and he's just before the quarantine got his teenager room. So he's got a TV and he's got a futon, and that means that he does not come downstairs most days until he demands to be fed. My wife is working from home, but she's an introvert. So we've developed a good you know, I'm looking over here because we have two green chairs that we sit in most of the time side by side, and I'm not bothered. But every now and then I'll say, I have to go work in the bedroom, and she'll be like, yeah, you do, go away. But other than that, we're figuring it out.
Cool. I'm just checking, see if there's any other questions. There's not currently. Okay, so as Rachel is Anna's editor, I've always wondered, is there something that you've edited out of a book that Rachel said, you know what, cut that, and then later on you've gone, you know what, I should never have cut that. That would have been excellent. Has that ever happened? Or to any books that have been edited by anyone else for you, Rachel? Have you ever cut anything out and gone, I wish I hadn't cut that out?
No, nothing major. Every now and then I'll go back over something and I'll say, oh, that wasn't the word I wanted. That's horrible. That's horrible enough as it is. So I don't think that there's anything major. My first book had a very rough editing experience. So there's a couple things that were added that I didn't love, but never anything that cut that I regretted. Anna, I don't think I've ever cut anything major of yours, but.
Well, we could talk about the creepy child who you wanted me to remove and I didn't.
I did. There is a scene in Night Tide. You guys are going to have to read this book because I'm not going to spoil it. But a child asks what I considered a really disturbing question. And with a exotic pet and its eating habits, and Anna just like goes on. The book just continues, and I was like, is no one going to address the demon child?
I just want little girls who love their pet snakes to feel seen, Ray.
And I was like, I just feel like maybe we either need to cut that line or like someone needs to respond to it, like maybe a mandated reporter. And Anna was like, no, it's good, I'm going to leave it. And I was like, okay, that's fine. This is the kind of editor that I am. I don't ever come down to heavy on an author. I want them to think about their choices. I want them to think
about your choices.
Yeah, think about your life, think about your choices. And I want them to think about how it's coming across to someone who's not living in their head, right? So I want them to think about those choices and how they're coming across to a reader. But I don't think I would ever demand something be cut unless I thought it could be a real obstacle to publication. And at that point, I still would probably bring in other readers. I would bring in another author. I would bring in our publisher and say, is anybody else getting what I'm getting here? But I don't think I would ever unilaterally demand something be cut.
Yeah, no, you're pretty good about that. I feel like there hasn't been a point in time where I was like, I really missed that one scene where so-and-so happened. Okay, so having said that, I think that in Thorn, which was my second book, I had an opening which I thought was very fitting for the character. She's this semi-immortal icy huntress, and she really doesn't like when people poach her friends. And so my publisher emailed me and said, I just want you to maybe consider lowering the body count in the first chapter. So I did. So he only kills 3 people. Two, just 2. But I will say that actually less is often more. And so if you want something to be more impactful, sometimes reducing the number can be beneficial. So I learned something from it. I learned how to make horrible things more horrible.
So Anna, the comment that I did not cut because I enjoyed greatly, but I did ask you if you wanted perhaps a take on how one of the readers might be reading the sentence. Your parents are still here.
They're adults.
So, okay. So Anna wrote a sex scene that, well, yeah, it's leading into a sex scene with a writing crop. There's a writing crop involved. and she used the word fuck, but also the words butt and riding crop and the same sentence. And so I was like, look, I get what you wrote here, but how this looked to a quick read was that you were using butt fucking and riding crops. And I'm not judging. I wanted you to be real clear that I'm not judging you for that, but I just wanted to make sure that that was a choice that you wanted to make. And
I'm gonna confirm either way.
Yeah. I was like, you put these 3 words together and it will give people an image. And I just want to make sure that that's the image you're actually going for here. And she wrote back like 37 lines of ha, 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 ha. No, that was not the image I was going for. And she restructured that sentence. But that's my editing style. It's not, you need to fix this. It was, you made a choice. And I just want to make sure that it's the choice you wanted to come across there.
Yeah, you both wrote, from my point of view, happy ever afters. But in Anna's latest one, what I loved about Night Tide was at the end, and I love a happily ever after, that's my thing. But at the end, you knew that the protagonists were going to have to work at it because they weren't quite still aligned on their views with a lot of things. And I love that. But was that quite hard to write as someone that generally does write characters that are riding off into the sunset, especially just you've left a little bit of conflict there for them?
Well, okay, so see, here's the thing. In my first draft, the characters don't ride off into the sunset because I am not nice to my beloved characters. So it's often with the influence of others that they end up happily ever after. So I think I would put Night Tide in the same category as I would put Thorn, in the sense that I love those endings because they feel, there's a bittersweet quality to them that I just like, because I mean, that's kind of my aesthetic. But and it's not even that it's realistic necessarily. I think there's just, I couldn't have written for those characters a happily ever after that felt right. They're just too complicated, and so I needed something that was going to be to let the reader know that, yeah, exactly as you said, that, you know, they were going to have to work at it. So I enjoyed that. I enjoyed working with that in a way that tried to convey that. So I was happy to read
it felt more real. Yeah, I think it made it feel more real in a way, like how we, in normal life we have to work at things, right? And I think that was, I really enjoyed that aspect of it. Kerry Paulson has come in and asked, Anna, how much of Night Tide did you have planned while you were working on Spindrift, if at all?
So I knew at the end of Spindrift I'd started thinking about Lillian's character, and somehow, I don't remember exactly how it happened. I was concussed, but I remember thinking, I knew I wanted to write an enemies to lovers, and I knew that I really liked Lillian. And so I thought to myself, okay, what would really unhinge a character who just thought that they had sort of everything going according to plan? And in Spindrift, Lillian's a character who's very, you know, she's a little bit of the mom of the group, right? She just takes care of everybody. And so I thought, okay, like, Lillian thinks she's really mature. She thinks that she's got her shit locked down. So I need to break her open. I need to just like bust into that. And then I thought, okay, Ivy. So that's how Ivy came about.
Cool. So we know about proper English, which I'm really excited about, but what's next for you, Anna, in the series?
I believe it's going to be Stormy's story. She was more forefront than Stevie and Angie. Okay, also, I know people like Stevie and Angie, and so I'm just going to say this because, you know, I know most of you, I liked most of you. They can wait till the end, right? Like, that's a foregone conclusion, and I can draw that. If I could draw that out over the course of a series, I wanted to try. Having said that, I reserve the right to reverse publication at the last minute. But I wanted Stormy to be next because I feel like she's earned it, at least in my mind, and her story is taking up more space right now.
Awesome, cool. I'm excited for that, and I agree. Stevie and Angie, can't wait for that, and I actually feel that you're pulling us along with you. The anticipation is real. My last question was, if you could give up one thing in your life to become a better writer, what would it be? What would be the thing that you love that you would give up to become a better writer?
Ray, you can go first.
Well, I guess I would let go of Brussels sprouts.
Something you love.
I actually do quite like Brussels sprouts. Something I love, that's hard. And in a way, I'm going to take a smidge of a cop out on this one, because I think we already do that, right? This is my talk to the camera moment. We already give up a lot to be better writers, and we will continue to do so. We give up time. We give up careers that make us a living wage. We give up, I give up a lot of things that I would do if I had more money. I would travel a lot more, and there's, there's a lot of things that we give up security wise, right? Anna and I are both living somewhat precarious student loan kind of, well, Anna's still living in the apartment. I'm still drowning in the student loans. And we are choosing this life because we're committed to our craft, and because we love giving the readers these parts of ourselves that we would otherwise be giving to other pursuits. So I think, I guess those answers are time, money, security, all of the above.
You're here.
Yeah, and we thank you for it. We thank you for it. Just keep writing. Don't stop writing. Do you guys prefer like writing dialogue or content? What's your favorite to write?
Dialogue, hands down.
Yeah, I prefer reading dialogue, so
it works out well. What about you? Anna writes much better prose than I do, though, so maybe she feels differently.
I think it depends on the book. So if it's a book where it's more, I don't know, the more dialogue heavy books, potentially, but it also depends on the character chemistry. So certainly there are characters who it just comes so easily, the back and forth is just so natural. And there are others where I would just love to spend all my time describing scenery, which I stop myself from doing because of course we require plot. But yeah.
Cool. And does writing energize you both, or does it exhaust you? How do you feel when you write the end at the end of one of your books?
Well,
are you energized for the next one, or are you like, whoa, I'm ready for a rest now?
Like at the end of an individual writing day, I might be pumped up. Like if it went really well, then I'm pumped up. More often than not, I am exhausted and I go put my head down on the table for a little bit. Finishing a book generally makes me feel lonely.
Yeah. There's this huge like slump after each one where I just and I think part of it is because towards the end of a project, it snowballs, especially when deadlines come in, right? So you just like you end up you're working, and then just like when you work really hard towards anything, there is that initial letdown where you've lost that driving purpose for the time being, and it's lonely because you spend so much time with those characters and then all of a sudden you stop. Well, I mean, but even if you're still working within the same world, it's you've let them go, so
yeah,
and then they don't belong to you anymore.
Yeah, as a reader, I've found that in like certain times in my life when maybe things aren't going that great for some reason, and you get so invested in a book and you feel like it takes you away, and then you finish the book and you say, oh, well, what's next? Like, okay, like I really like involved with these characters and I felt like I was living their life for that time, and then you're not anymore.
Yeah. The book hangover is real.
The book hangover is real. Okay, well, I'm just going to double check and see if we've missed anything. Have
I
you?
can see Carrie call for a Nell-centric series. I love that.
I mean, I would love to write a series of books about dogs from the dog's point of view. That'd be great.
Yeah,
You would finish like every day in the best mood if you just got to live in a dog's point of view all the time.
Well, okay, so you'd think that, but then you'd meet my dog and it would just be one long grumble. We didn't go for a walk at the appropriate time. I was not fed at the appropriate time. What are you doing?
Okay, so Landis just made a good point there that's what Patreon is for. And Anna and I are both on Patreon. Anna is kicking my butt in the original content department. She is writing.
The Patreon anthology just arrived on my doorstep, so I'm going to ship it out to patrons of a certain tier, and I'm so stoked.
Yes, she is killing it on Patreon. I mostly just give people sneak peeks of things that I'm working on because I really want to talk to somebody about it, and I know I'm not supposed to share all the things on social media. So that's when I get on Patreon and I talk about those things. Also, Anna and I have a video on there talking about Taylor Swift, and I think you also did an interview with Chris Bryant.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Bryant.
2 Truths and a Lie.
Oh yeah, we played 2 Truths and a Lie.
Lined up, I am going to be interviewing my friend and indie author Esty Simper, and I don't know what we're going to talk about, but probably terrible things that we love doing to characters. So there's that to look forward to.
Chris Bryant and I have just concocted a plan. Have any of you ever seen the show called Drunk History?
Yes.
Yes. So Chris Bryant and I are going to play Drunk Lesfic. We are going to read each other's books, drink something that will probably make me very sick, and then recap each other's books. So we're going to summarize the plot of the other author's book. Yeah, Ann Eder, exactly right. Half a glass of champagne is usually enough to do me in, but I've been told
concerned for you.
Peanut butter whiskey. So, yeah, that if you want to see me drink peanut butter whiskey and tell you about Chris Bryant's latest release, get on Patreon. That's where we'll be doing that.
Kerry Paulson has just said that the Patreon videos are great. It made me remember that I wanted to ask about how you each approach sex scenes.
That's a great question because those are...
Sorry, Anna's parents.
My mom is also a writer, and she and I have talked about this. It's just those are intimacy scenes are hard to write, right, Ray?
This is why I'm drinking. You can just take this from me.
So I feel like, well, when I first started writing, and conveniently Corelia Says Waters is in the audience, and she and I are going to talk about this coming up next week, but I was terrified because do you know when you open a book, right, and then you're reading a sex scene and it's just, you just cringe, right? It's just awful. Or there's that one word and you're like, oh, and you never forget it. It sticks in your head forever. I don't want to write that. I don't want to be the person who writes the scene that forever makes you want to curl up and die inside. Like, so I was terrified for a while. And also, I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm a little bit of a prude. So at heart, it was hard, and no pun intended. And it just got harder. No, it's definitely a skill, right? And it's something that I really, okay. I think I write my best, like, steamiest scenes when I first wake up in the morning, right? Visualize this, me in like my grungiest sweatpants, my cup of coffee. I'm like disgusting, right? And that's when I'm in the zone. So part of it for me was just like, and I shared this because it's just like breaking down the sort of preconceptions that I had about what it was supposed to be, and just sort of trying to think about what, not necessarily even what I wanted to read, but just what felt real for the characters. And once I got past the just like the buildup we have, especially in Western culture surrounding sex, like how can sex drive character development? How can sex drive plot? And that's in a romance novel. I mean, that if you just have these extraneous scenes, it defeats the purpose, and it doesn't have the emotional resonance that makes it a satisfying read. So that's my TED talk. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, I think you hit on a big key point there, is that the only reason that you have any scene in a book is to develop character or forward the plot. And so I think that's the basis of a good sex scene as well. When you get into the details of that, I do think it carries more weight than any other scene. The example that I always give is that if I were to say, I'm going to the cupboard to get a glass, or I'm going to the cabinet to get a cup, you don't care. Neither one of those sentences say the same things with different words. If I say, I grabbed your ass or caressed your backside, totally different sentences, right? Those are totally different sentences, despite the fact that the meanings of the words are the same. In a sense, the connotation is really different. And so it's, for me, those scenes can feel a lot like writing poetry, and that word choice matters more there than it does in other places.
Absolutely.
Throughout the book. I have a playlist. I have a playlist to write my books, but I have a sex scene writing music playlist that I
What's
use.
on that playlist?
You can totally creep it. It's on Spotify. I don't hide it. It's just called Sexy. So if you want to go creep my Spotify, you can do that. But I also occasionally have to like block them out, like you would be blocking a theater scene, because sometimes I forget where people's hands are. But so you've got this high level emotional mental connotation word game going on, and then you also have the logistics of where's everyone's hands. I have absolutely been guilty of being like, honey, lay down, I need to see if this is physically possible. Can you just come here for a second? And then occasionally the answer is, oh, if I were just slightly more coordinated, I do believe that would be possible. But there's also, going back to Gentleman Jack, you guys are going to find out what a Lister sister I am here. There are scenes in that show that are written from and shot from such a female gaze that it made me think differently. And actually, there's a scene in Modern English with where they're arguing over an intimacy coordinator, where he says, well, if the camera's on your face, we're not going to know what he's doing. And the lead actress responds, well, if he's doing it well, my face should convey that. And it's one of those things where watching that show, episode 4, I'm going to give you all the shortcut right now.
I know exactly the episode you're talking about.
Yeah, there's a scene where they are having sex and Ann Lister is on top of Ann Walker, and she makes this face. They both make a face that anyone who's ever had sex with a woman knows exactly what happened right there. Everybody who's ever had sex with a woman knows what just happened in that moment. And so I think that sort of connection has caused me to up my game. Not that I shy away from any of the physical descriptions, because I don't, but I want anyone reading this book, when they hit that scene, to know that feeling, to know what just happened mentally and physically and emotionally. So that's the stakes when you're writing a sex scene.
And I think both of you have really upped the ante in the sex. I mean, Modern English for a start Wow. Just wow. Very sexy. But Anna, in the last two books, Spindrift and Night Tide, again, like the ante has been like it's up there. This is not the sex scenes you had written before. These are really intense at times. It's amazing. Really great.
I would like to compliment Anna on that because I believe that Spindrift caused me to raise my game in that department. I actually, the weekend before the pandemic hit, was sitting around a table with Georgia Beers and Melissa Braden, who are two of the premier lesbian romance writers. And I was editing Spindrift at the time, and I said, y'all are on notice. We're all on notice because the game just changed. Anna Burke just changed the game for all of us. And they took notice. So I think that it's rare that someone comes in and says the rules are different in mainline lesbian romance now. And I think Spindrift did that as a book.
Yeah, it did. 100%. And Kerry Paulson said Spindrift somehow made me gayer. I have to agree. I think it made a lot of us gayer in a lot of ways. And I love the dynamic in it. I think we were waiting for that book in a lot of ways. There's a lot of people out there that were waiting for that dynamic shift to be different. It was excellent. It really was.
Forgot to pick up my kid from school. I told this story in the last time we did one of these, but I'm going to tell it again. Like, I was so mesmerized by that scene when I was editing that, like, my phone rang and I was like, what? And my son was like, Mommy, are you coming to get me? And I was like, yes, I am in the car right now. I'm behind a school bus, okay? Mommy is just stuck behind a school bus. And then I just like ran out the door and jumped off my front porch and got in the car as I lied to my kid about why I wasn't there to pick him up. That's how good one of those scenes was.
And I think I feel like I peaked. I feel like I don't know how I can top that. So
that's what she said.
Actually, she said it instant.
The back and forth in our editorial. I am a very mature person. I can be very professional, and yet most of what I say in my comments in the sidebar and track changes with Ray is that's what she said.
Maybe you should publish that on Patreon.
I do on Patreon, so I will only publish it there because I do have a reputation. I am a professional.
I have never gotten so many editorial responses that just boil down to that's what she said.
And I mean, maybe that's my way of coping with constructive criticism, is to revert to a teenager, but it could be worse. It could be much worse. Also, it's just funny. It's funny.
Yeah. Anybody else have any other questions?
No.
Well, I want to say thank you to Anna for setting this up. I want to say thank you to Rach for help organizing it. I want to say thank you to everyone who jumped back in and didn't let some assholes win. Thanks for working through this. We are a resilient community, and I'm really proud to know all of you and work with all of you. And I hope that you guys have seen what you need to see to go buy the books right now. But if you have questions, Anna and I are both on social media. Anna, do you want to give them the places where they can find you?
Sure. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook-ish. I'm there. And Patreon. I'm most active on Instagram, Patreon, and Twitter. Mostly because I just fall down the rabbit hole on Facebook into like memes. So yeah, and I also do want to apologize. I feel like as host, it is our job to protect you from instances like that. I really had thought I'd made it where there were enough clicks that Zoom bombers wouldn't go through the effort. I was mistaken. So in the future, we will revert back to registration.
So
you'll be able to find all of Anna and Rachel's books on Bywater's bookstore. It's the best place to go because you can actually get to find their other books there as well. and they're both on Amazon, and the links are in the chat.
Yeah, and Rach, I want to give you a chance before we go to plug your Facebook group, because you have a great space for people to discuss women loving women, not just fiction, I guess, but just books.
Yeah, books. Yeah, we are the Lesbian Fiction Book by Les Rivera, and we welcome everyone. We wanted to create a space where anybody could come and talk about women loving women books. Authors ask author questions. We have a monthly book club, and we have a monthly author chat where an author comes in and has a chat with us for a while. Actually, Rachel, you're next.
I am. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes,
A
next
couple
weekend.
weeks, right?
Yeah, no, 14th. It's Valentine's Day. We're doing Valentine's Day. We're going to
Yeah.
go all romantic on us.
Yay.
Yeah, very excited about it. Yeah, so come and join and have fun and ask questions and have a chat. It's a safe space. It's we ask certain questions before you come in to make sure that you're one of us, because we don't really want we've had a bit like what happened this evening. We've had some crazy people come in the past. So yeah, but if you don't want to answer the questions, feel free to send me a message and I'll submit you in.
Wonderful.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Have a great evening.
Good evening.